The next more expensive V4 will cost you 15,000 euros more. So, what can the Benda Dark Flag 500 do? Stick around to find out. When you hear V4, you immediately think of exclusive bikes, and I really did look it up. After the Benda, the cheapest V4 out there is the Aprilia Tuono. That one goes for a neat 23,600 euros here in Austria. What we've got here is a price tag, just so we're clear right from the start, of 8,990 euros. So we're talking a massive difference. And a V4 in a cruiser? That's something you'll only find at Ducati otherwise, with the X-Diavel V4. So, in that sense, the Benda is quite a fascinating concept, and one we were very keen to take a closer look at. One thing I want to mention up front, this right here is the Dark Flag 500 in its Euro 5 version. If you're sitting there thinking, I like it so much I'm ordering one regardless of what else gets said, then what you'll receive is a slightly revised version, the Commander version. That one has a few differences. The dash gets upgraded to a TFT display, the exhaust routing is different, or rather, the exhaust cover has a different color. It's silver. And of course, it meets Euro 5 Plus standards. This one here, though, is not A2 compliant. It puts out 54 horsepower. The upcoming version will be limited to 48 horsepower, making it rideable with the A2 license. The V4 is the centerpiece, so let's start right there, with the engine. It's a 500 cubic centimeter unit, which means each cylinder has just under 125 cubic centimeters. In a V4 layout, with 16 valves, and in this version, it delivers 54 horsepower. Future versions will have 48, with a peak torque of 42 Newton meters. And what exactly that power has to move, we'll show you now. Officially, Benda lists the weight at 260 kilos. We'll weigh it ourselves fully fueled using the 1000 PSV scale, and you'll see that value on screen now. Just to wrap up the basic technical data, we're looking at 16-inch wheels here, classic bobber tires with a balloon profile. Up front, we've got a 130 section with a 90 profile, and at the rear, it's a 150 with a 70 profile. And going through all these specs, I've actually arrived at what I think is the real highlight of this bike. For me, it's not the V4 engine. We've got an air suspension fitted at the rear. Yes, you heard that right. In a production motorcycle, in a cruiser with a V4 engine, there's now an air suspension system. This Benda air suspension only affects the rear shocks. And basically, let me quickly explain this because it's not something you see every day. It works in 3 stages. As it's standing here in front of me now, it's in the fully lowered position. As soon as I get on the bike, the electric pump adjusts it to a level that matches my weight. That's the standard position, and Benda calls it the comfort mode. Then there's a small button at the end of the left handlebar with 2 arrow symbols on it. If you press and hold that, the suspension lifts into what they call the sport position. That increases ground clearance, which in turn gives you more lean angle. Let's quickly run through the rest of the features. Of course, it comes with ABS. There's also a traction control system. That can be switched off using a button on the right-hand side of the handlebar. We've also got a cruise control here with set and reset functions. I'll come back to that a bit later, but that more or less wraps up the features. On the tachometer housing, there's a USB-A port. In the Commander version, that'll be replaced with a USB-A and USB-C combo. But otherwise, that's it in terms of features. The seat height, something else that's maybe worth mentioning, in riding position, so not fully lowered, is between 670 and 700 millimeters. So that's really accessible, even for people who aren't my height of 1.87 meters, it won't be a problem at all. As for the 260 kilos, well, you already know the exact figure. It's also manageable when maneuvering at a standstill, because the center of gravity is pleasantly low. And another thing you notice right away while standing still, the steering lock is actually quite wide for a cruiser. That also means turning around isn't a problem, despite the longer wheelbase. Right, before we dive into the riding impressions, here's a quick bit of info about the brakes. Up front, we've got a single disc with a twin piston caliper measuring 320 millimeters, and at the rear, it's a 260 millimeter disc. And in the cruiser world, it's not unusual, but always welcome, is a belt drive, so no need to mess around with chain maintenance. Now then, how does the Benda actually ride? What's it good at? What's it not? I was honestly very curious about this V4 in a cruiser, the air suspension, and just the overall riding experience. What does this whole package actually feel like? I want to start again with the engine. Obviously, it's not going to blow you away. We're only talking 500 cubic centimeters. But this V4, well, there's a reason they run V4s in MotoGP. It's fundamentally a performance-oriented concept. And here, you can really tap into it. The power delivery is nice and linear. But to be honest, that's something that doesn't quite match what you'd normally expect from a cruiser at first glance. You don't get that massive low-end punch, but compared to an inline 4, for example, there's still enough torque down low to keep things moving along reasonably well. It is a bit odd though. If you really want to get all the power out of it, even in this laid-back cruiser setting, you'll need to rev it quite high. The rev limiter only kicks in at just over 10,000 RPM, which is definitely an unusual trait in a cruiser, but if you want to make any real progress, you'll need to be up in the 6,000 or 7,000 range now and then, otherwise it's all a bit on the sluggish side. That gentle puttering along in 6th gear at super low revs, yeah, that's not really this bike's thing. Another thing worth mentioning, the gear ratios are so short that in 6th gear at 50 kilometers per hour, you're already sitting at 3,000 RPM. So riding at low revs is actually quite tricky with this machine, and that's something you'll need to get used to. If I hop onto a cruiser, feet forward, I sort of instinctively expect that low-end rumble and easygoing vibe, but that's not exactly what you get here. And right from the start, as soon as I fire it up, this V4 actually sounds pretty good. It's got presence, though that doesn't quite carry through once you're underway. The second thing that feels a bit odd in a cruiser is this air suspension. I didn't really have any expectations there, to be honest, since it's the first time I've ever ridden something with a setup like this. And the two modes, comfort and sport, well, let's just say their names aren't entirely accurate. In comfort mode, yes, you do get more comfort. But in sport mode, which raises the ride height, it actually makes the whole setup worse. The rear gets stiffer, the damping stops working properly, you don't exactly bounce around, but the shocks start to feel like balloons that have been pumped up too much. You can really feel it happen, and it becomes harsh. The response from the rear end in sport mode is nowhere near what you get in comfort, and that's a bit of a shame. Still, if you want to ride a bit more aggressively, you're better off switching into sport mode anyway. That's because both the ground clearance and the lean angle are really limited in this bike. And just like with the Napoleon Bob, which I tested a while back in Barcelona, the first thing to touch down on the Dark Flag 500 is the frame, not the foot pegs. You need to be aware of that. If you're moving at pace and you hit a surprise bump, the rear suspension in comfort mode can compress so much that the frame bottoms out. That's not a great feeling. So if you're riding a bit faster, go into sport mode. Even if you lose some damping quality in the rear, at least you stay upright and don't get launched. So from my point of view, that's something Benda definitely needs to improve. But ultimately, this isn't a bike built for thrashing about. It's meant for cruising. And in that regard, I have to say, the seating position is very well executed, the knee angle is relaxed, the foot pegs are set forward, and the seat itself, with its stitched pattern and the texture across the surface, feels nicely made. What I do notice, given my height, is that because the passenger seat is mounted up behind me, I get pushed into a fixed position and can't shift back freely. That's something I'd personally like to see improved. Basically, we've got a maximum payload of 180 kilos, so yes, you can take someone on the back. Howie was kind enough to hop on behind me, and it does get a bit tight back there for his backside. Also, the rear light, the brake light or tail light, isn't fully visible anymore with a passenger. Still, I'd say for a quick trip to the ice cream cafe, it's not a big deal. That 180 kilo load limit is fair. Realistically though, you wouldn't take this bike on a long 2-up journey anyway. Now, one feature I definitely want for a longer ride, and one that Benda has thankfully included, is cruise control. Although, I have to say, using it is a bit fiddly. I couldn't quite figure out whether you need to press set or reset to activate it. Once it's engaged, on this model, through the small LC display, you get a tiny green indicator that tells you it's either ready or already set. But it doesn't really give clear feedback about whether it's currently active. It also doesn't seem to hold the speed with total precision, at least that was my impression. Still, it's a nice feature to have, and I imagine once you've played around with it a bit on the motorway, you'll get the hang of it. But it's fair to say, others do it better. I've already talked quite a bit about this V4 engine, but of course what's also important is that it brakes properly, and I have to say the braking system does the job. With cruisers, it's always crucial to make good use of the rear brake to get full stopping power. This isn't a system that bites aggressively. The JJ1 components, a Brembo sub-brand, are fitted here. They suit the bike's concept really well, though they're nothing sporty. The ABS isn't switchable either, and since we're on the subject of wheels, let's talk briefly about the tires fitted here. They're made by CST, a Chinese brand, and I have to say, they've delivered a usable tire that matches the overall character of the bike. Still, I think you could get a bit more performance and maybe better inherent damping with a European premium tire. And damping is something worth mentioning. Despite the balloon-like look of the tires, it's not really their strong point. But where they do shine, in my opinion, is handling. I was skeptical at first, especially with such a wide front tire, how it would behave, and with a wheelbase that's nothing short. But actually it steers in quite willingly. The generous steering lock helps, and so does the wide handlebar. You really get the sense that even tight hairpins can be handled with confidence. The overall bike weight is very centralized and low, which makes it very predictable. There's a slight tendency to stand up under braking in corners, but that's not unusual. And again, if you're looking into the Benda, you're probably not chasing sports bike precision anyway. V4 engines do have a bit of a reputation for being thirsty. I wasn't able to give you a solid fuel consumption figure during my test ride though. Because of all the stopping and starting while filming, it just wouldn't be reliable. What I can tell you is this: I've never seen a fuel gauge like it on a bike before. It's actually quite clever. The 16-liter tank sitting here in front of me has a row of tiny LEDs, and the bottom one is red. I set off this morning with a full tank, and now it's empty. That's after around 150 kilometers. So yeah, it does seem to drink a fair bit. But I think it's a fun little detail, and I really like that Benda dares to try things like this when it comes to design. And with that, I'll start to wrap things up with a bit of a conclusion about the Dark Flag 500. Benda is a Chinese manufacturer, a new player on the scene, and they've got the guts to experiment, and I honestly think that's cool. You can feel however you like about the end result, you might love it or not, but they just go for it. They put it out there and see how the market reacts. Will people go for something like air suspension? Do they want a V4 in a cruiser? They're doing some slightly mad things, and I think that boldness deserves recognition. In terms of build quality, they've done a lot right here too. A lot of what looks like metal really is metal, and that goes some way to explaining the bike's hefty weight. Small things like throttle response. This still uses a throttle cable rather than a ride-by-wire system. Maybe it's not as refined as some others out there, but for a cruiser, it fits. You're not riding on the edge here, needing ultra-precise throttle input to hit your line. So in that context, it makes sense. They're also fitting some pretty nice components, things that look high-end. These mirrors, for example, they're small and elegant, the kind of thing you'd normally look for in the accessories catalog, but they're standard here. Same goes for the adjustable levers. Again, not something you usually get on an A2 class bike. And then there's the quad exit exhaust system. Visually, that's something no one else has. And now, to all of you watching, this is where you come in. Have a look at it for yourselves, and please drop a comment below the video. What do you think about Benda and their bold entry into the market this year? Do you like that they're shaking things up a bit? Or do you think it's messing up the market, throwing out prices that just don't match up, making things complicated? Let me know down below what you think. By the way, the Dark Flag Commander will be available not only in this black version you're seeing here, but also in white. You can already check out the updated look on the Benda website. But I hope I've managed to give you a solid first impression of this machine. Curious to see what else Benda has in store. We've already had 2 of their bikes in this year. Rumor has it something bigger is coming at the EICMA, if the grapevine is to be believed. So stick around, subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss any updates on the cruiser segment or anything else for that matter. Thanks for watching, thanks to the cameraman for his work, and goodbye.